Hey y'all, it's Andrew. Today I'm going to take you on a walk through Audubon Park. I got a request from a viewer recently, hi Dave, asking about green spaces and overlooks. And we're a pretty flat town, New Orleans, so you don't get a lot of overlooks unless you get into a tall building, go to the Mississippi riverfront, or climb a tree. But one of our green spaces, Audubon Park, can allow you to do the second and third of those things. So it kind of combines all of these ideas in one. And it's in a beautiful part of the city, uptown New Orleans. So this is where like residents of the Garden District and surrounding neighborhoods go when they want even more greenery than their very green neighborhoods already provide. And it's also right up against Tulane and Loyola Universities. So if you're spending time on or near those campuses, this is really convenient too. It also happens to be bordered on one side by St. Charles Avenue, our famous mansion-lined street that borders the Garden District as well and has the streetcar running along it. And on the other side, the park is bordered by Magazine Street, which is maybe the other most sought-out corridor through the uptown area. So between the Garden District, Magazine Street, St. Charles Avenue, and these two big universities, and of course the park itself, there's a ton to do around here, and the park is sizable enough that you can get kind of immersed in it, but it's not so big that you're going to get lost or need to spend all day to fully explore it. So it's a great thing to combine with some of these other uptown stuff. Also, because it's spring right now, I'm going to get to show it to you when it's really almost at its best. A lot of cool nature stuff that we're going to be able to talk about. And for being such a peaceful, quiet space today, it's got some really volatile history. So we'll get into some of that as well. We've also got other videos that kind of neighbor onto this one, so if you want to see more around here, you can always check out our video walks of St. Charles Avenue. We've got a couple of those, and of Magazine Street, City Park, if you want to see some other green spaces as well. And I'll refer to the beginning of our road trip series that goes along the Mississippi riverfront to kind of be a sequel to this one at the end. And if you want to tip your guide, you can find the way to do that down in the notes. Let's get started. And welcome to Audubon Park. This is the front entrance right along St. Charles Avenue. That is St. Charles Avenue, and right across the street from the park is Tulane University, recognizable by its stone buildings. And then you've got Loyola University over there, recognizable by its brick buildings. So there's no way to not know that you've gotten to this area unless you're closing your eyes. And I say gotten to it because St. Charles is the home of our famous streetcar. So if you were to pick up the streetcar down in or near the French Quarter, you'd be starting off way down that way, and you would be gradually riding up, if you didn't get off, through here. And this is actually where I would suggest getting off, because you've kind of hit the culmination of the scenery along the street by now. There's some cool stuff up ahead, but it's a lot more modest. And you can also take advantage of the park in and of itself and of the walk through it, which leads to another really sought-after uptown street, Magazine Street, on the other side. So more on that later on. Just from this area alone, you get kind of a feel for the landscaping we've got around here. Decent amount of tropical stuff. Our incredible native live oak trees, which we'll see a ton of, and all the bright color over there. It's late March right now, so spring is in full swing here. Not everything is at its peak, but those are azaleas. When you see colorful stuff in New Orleans and in a lot of Louisiana, what you're seeing is, I'm just gonna grab my trusty steed here and take y'all in. What you tend to see a lot of is fashions that came to us from the European landscaping preferences of the 18th and 19th centuries, which is really colorful plants from Eastern Asia. And the park gives you that look up front. So lots and lots of color when you first get in, whereas as you get further back, you get more of its early design, which is sort of the sparer but really elegant native landscaping that we don't necessarily see a terrible lot of in parks in Louisiana. So this would be the colorful portion. You know, if you hoofed it up here, if you're riding a bike, you got a great area to take a break. You've got benches in the sun and in the shade. Depending on what time of year you're here, you may well find yourself wanting either one. And here's a closer glimpse of our live oaks. So by and large, the daily use of Audubon Park is this fitness trail that runs through the whole thing. So you'll get walkers and runners and bikers and skateboarders and so on. And if you're exploring it with an idea of passing through, there's our streetcar, then I would be heading in this direction. The bike track is one way, but this is the side that would be closer to you as you hop off the streetcar, that I would start exploring. Man, okay. The time of the year that I'm here, these guys are doing great. These are a South American import called a Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, and so called because the flowers open up purple and then fade and eventually turn white. So you can kind of tell the age of each flower even before they start to wilt. And not native, but man, do the butterflies love them. So, bookmark March as the month to come in if you want to see these at their best. And there's a lagoon that runs through a lot of the park. One of the reasons to kind of hug the left side of the park from St. Charles is that the lagoon only runs along that side, and so you get a different kind of nature scenery, and you also get a lot of waterfowl if you're here the right time of the year. Got a map here to give you a bit of a feel for what the place is like. So the St. Charles Avenue entrance is up here. We just passed through. And then what I'm recommending is heading down what here looks like the right side of it, but as you're facing it would be the left side. Down you go, and you come out at Magazine Street. And we will touch more on that as we get over there. Looking at it from a bit more of a zoom out, you can see it's this weird tapered shape. And if you continued this map down into Audubon Zoo and into Audubon Riverview Park, which everyone calls the Fly, it would go still wider, and that part touches the river. And if you continued up with, on the other side of the street, Tulane and Loyola, it would taper further and further. So what you see here is this long, very gently tapering wedge, and it is an old plantation property. And this is what all of them looked like. They were wide at the river, and they would taper as they went away from the river. And I say all, I mean all of the ones that were in what's now uptown New Orleans, because the river does this big bend around us. So all of the plantations touched the river and then retreated back towards the wetlands into narrower and narrower spaces. And the way by which New Orleans expands is plantation owners, under pressure from a steadily growing population and seeing the temptation of making some quick money, sell off their plantations for development, and they turn into little cities or little expansions of cities bit by bit. And it's really hard to see the vestiges of that these days. The clearest thing is Audubon Park, because it has this shape seen from above that clearly delineates the borders of the old plantations, and there actually is a little bit of a visual vestige left behind. Here's some of that sparer landscaping. I'm taking us down to the old entrance. So, working our way back along St. Charles again. Here is Loyola. I'm going to go in where we would have entered if we'd been here back in a certain moment of the 19th century. First time people sought this place out in big numbers. If you're here with kids, as you can see, there's a playground up here, and a playground of man-made things enriched with some very, very climbable live oaks. So, I think, earlier when I was just getting out here, there were a bunch of folks up in this oak tree here, and you can see from how low the branches grow that the temptation would be pretty strong. If you're the kind of person who's likely to go up in a tree under any circumstances, these are going to be the ones that kind of tip you over that edge. And I happen to have it on a trustworthy source that this is one of the 3 climbing permitted trees on Audubon's property. Why do we know that obscure fact? Well, I grew up in the country, and I was a very avid live oak tree climber. All kinds of trees, but live oaks are a favorite. And early in my time living in New Orleans, in my, late teens, early 20s, I was climbing a different live oak tree in Audubon Park with a friend. And the Audubon Institute's arborist showed up and asked us to come down very, very nicely. And so we came down, and he explained that he was the arborist for the entire Audubon Institute, which is this and the zoo on the other side of it, and there's a little bit of space besides around town, which we thought was a really cool job. And we told him so, and he was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. I get a raise every day, and I get high every day. Get it? Because he has those machines that you go up. Anyway, so he explained to us that for the well-being of the trees and the well-being of the people who might climb into them, they had picked 3 trees because this one kids are going to climb no matter what because it's right next to a playground, and a tree inside of the Audubon Zoo, and one other one that I will show you a little later on. But he asked us to be good role models the rest of the time and not climb the other ones. I feel like I need to point this out because you will often be here on a hot day, and so oftentimes right here you will have this or some other snowball stand or gelato stand, as is the case right now, parked here as a way to cool off a little bit, bring some water too. But very nostalgic of past trips out here, seeing these guys set up. For New Orleanians that have been around a long time, what you expect to see is the Roman candy cart. Some of the time, it doesn't always come this far up St. Charles, but it's this old wooden horse-drawn cart that sells this kind of taffy stuff called Roman candy. Very old school New Orleans treat. So this is that old entrance. And you could easily get off the streetcar right over there at the intersection with Calhoun Street so as to make the shortcut to this. So here we are. You would get the first views of Loyola, brick buildings, a little more modern than the main part of the campus. And then you would have this much smaller entrance leading into Exposition Boulevard, the most grandiose possible name for what is well and clearly a sidewalk. So this is a little hint that this place has been through some stuff in its time. Incidentally, that structure over there is where bathrooms are located. Not information that you need right now while you're watching this on YouTube, but if you decide to pay a visit, you will thank me later. So, Exposition Boulevard used to be a lot bigger, and if you can kind of picture it from the little sidewalk that it is today, finding its way over to the path that I'm on now, something like that, and it kind of gently paved, let's call it. It was a shell road. We don't have gravel that's easily sourced in Louisiana, but our bodies of water are full of shells on the bottom, and they used to dredge that out and use it like gravel. So there was this shell road that was going to lead you to the entrance to the 1884 World Cotton Centennial Exposition, hence Exposition Boulevard. It also got called Boulevard Street for a little while, which is just one of my favorite street names I've ever heard. So this was way bigger, and you would use this on your way in because if you were arriving to the World Cotton Centennial Exposition, then it was probably 1884. None of that stuff over there existed yet. This was an area that was just kind of becoming city from having been plantations for so long. And the space around us, the old Fouché plantation, was the kind of last holdout. It was this big, embarrassingly abandoned space that was kind of begging for some kind of new use in the eyes of the people of the day. And so the World Cotton Centennial Exposition got organized, and people who visited arrived via maybe the streetcar. The streetcar well predates all this stuff. And they would have made their way by little carriages along that shell road, or maybe on foot if, admission was all that they could afford, down to the main entrance, which you can actually kind of still make out today. So apropos of this having been a plantation, the land has been through some incredible twists and turns, and it really is a series of coincidences that turns it into what it is now. So it's a plantation going back well before Mr. Fouché, but the namesake of the plantation, a Mr. Fouché, a Monsieur Fouché. So you can see the little side streets that butt right up against this. What a bucolic place to live, right? So Mr. Fouché, who it first was named for, passed it to the younger Mr. Fouché, who was not good at running plantations or just had bad luck. Either way, didn't make money off of it. Built a race course out here, didn't make money off of that, and just decided to ditch New Orleans and move off to France. You imagine this being your front door. Consult Zillow for your options, or better yet, a local realtor. A little bit of leftover from the Mardi Gras house floats days. Some of these are just becoming year-round decorative touches. And you can see, unsurprisingly, the horticulturally inclined really don't mind living along the edge of the park. Beautiful work. So when the younger Fouché left this place behind, it just ended up sitting abandoned for years, and it was thought of as this really embarrassing kind of overgrown jungle. And ultimately, it didn't see use from his abandonment shortly before the Civil War until a little ways into the war. And its use then was by both the Confederacy, the southern side in the war, and by the United States, the northern side, who at different points before and after New Orleans' occupation by the United States ended up using this space for a training camp and a hospital. After the war was over, those things continued to be used for a while, and then Mr. Fouché sued from a distance to get paid for the use of it and also the destruction of buildings on the grounds that he had abandoned but that were further damaged by that use. Brief aside, y'all, we've got some lovely scenery here. In the gentle wind, we get some wind chime sound, this hypnotic piece of yard art. No doubt some fun bird feeder observances, including squirrels somehow managing to get around that thing, because squirrels are the most resourceful creatures on this earth. And sapient trees. Who knew? So, yeah, it was actually really common for plantation owners, property owners, to get reparations from the government after the war for lost or damaged property, be that physical property or human property. It was kind of, if not the default, common enough that it could have been. So, eventually, Mr. Fouché, or rather his widow, gets paid and then sells the land off, and it becomes this shady deal that is trying to be a city park. A guy manages to get it on the cheap and convinces the city that it would be a great investment for a park and makes a huge amount of money doing so. Becomes a big public scandal and leaves a bad taste in the city's mouth around the public park system for a while. So, checkered history, to say the least. And then the World Cotton Centennial Expo comes along and continues the checkeredness. More on that in a moment. This is just kind of a hangout section of the park. I'm on a botanical agenda right now. I said earlier, a lot of our native plants tend to be a little bit more austere. Not seeing this one at its most elaborate right now, but these guys are a native exception. Got here Eastern Redbud, and a little shy of the time of the year that we're in right now, they will flower out over their entire body, and then they will leaf out afterwards. So this one is a little spare as of yet. It's between flowers and leaves, but you get them covered in pink and then covered in green. And then we have, not blooming just yet, the southern magnolia, which is Louisiana's state flower. Coming over to the lagoon, this is an important spot for us to venture in a little bit. You can see we've got a bridge across the lagoon over yonder. Going to use that to cut our way into the center of the park. So the lagoon was originally conceived to circle the whole thing, and in the middle you'd have this big open green. The notion being, if someone wanted to come out and just lie in the sun or play, I don't know what the popular urban sports of the day were, lawn darts or 9 pins or whatever. Not a piece of research that I've done. That big open green is where you do it. But park developments are famously hard to finance, and the handing off portions of it to private use is pretty common. Enjoy the gentle rhythmic sound of something stuck to my kickstand. And in this particular park, even before it all the way became a park, while it was under development as such, late 19th century, the big open space in the middle, conceived to be a public green, transformed into a golf course. And so as you come through this space, you get a giant warning sign to make sure that you will be aware that the gentle bucolic character of the place here will be nuanced with terror of flying objects coming through the air at you. And speaking of flying objects, I'm not going to venture very far in because of exactly that risk. I don't know how good these people's aim is. But over there, past the flag by the root of that big, not yet leafed out tree, you see that chunk over there? That is a vestige of the 1884 World Cotton Centennial Exposition. So you got a picture. This is kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but there was a gigantic building that occupied, basically like all the space that you can see right now. And it was the main hall of this exposition, which was basically like a World's Fair in 1884. It brought different countries and different states together to show off the wares and the cultures and the kind of accomplishments of each with a pretty heavy industrial tilt. And that was a chunk of iron ore from the Alabama exhibit. I don't know what the messaging around it was, but the kind of overall message of the event was that now that the Civil War and Reconstruction are over, the South is back. And not in the kind of, predatory or vengeful way that might sound, depending on where you're coming from, but that basically, like, the South is ready for new times, that it is industrializing, hence, iron ore might be a priority, and at the same time, it was very much about cotton. It was about the agrarian past of the place, and it kind of had mixed messages, you might say. But it was extremely ambitious. It was the city's way, in part. City partly financed it, but it was also an endeavor by the U.S. Congress of, kind of trying to give the place the jolt that Reconstruction had not so far done. And, it was an exciting idea to a lot of people, but the notion that all the problems of the Civil War were behind us was a little ambitious. And it also was massively ambitious in scale. The whole thing was built so that the only possible success would have been enormous success. And the entire endeavor really rode on millions of people showing up to this thing in a time before, expedient travel. Among the industrial wonders that the whole thing was supposed to show off was steam trains. So we're talking a pretty tall order, and it didn't come remotely close. It got about a quarter of the occupancy that it envisioned. So never a success in any way that you could really even squint to see. And there's barely a vestige of it left today. That big chunk of iron ore is the most visible thing that's left from the Expo. And if you ask people, a lot of people who have lived in New Orleans for a long time, they'll tell you that it's a meteorite, which was an April Fool's Day joke in a newspaper claiming that a meteor had struck Audubon Park. And, you know, I have to imagine that some not very credulous adults thought that was really funny and told it to their kids with straight faces, and the kids grew up believing it. So a lot of folks believe we have a meteorite in the middle of Audubon Park. The original joke was that the meteorite had struck there. I think even the people who take it seriously note the absence of a crater and don't take that version seriously. But it is, in fact, an argument for Alabama's industrial future. And among the reasons why that didn't work out is because we're talking about the time when cities like Chicago and a lot of what today we'd call the Rust Belt, it's just getting off the ground then, and clearly those things happened there. Easier train access to the very densely populated Northeast, places without as much historic baggage, places that weren't trying to rely on agriculture, etc. Ducks. We don't have a whole lot of them right now. There was a couple of days, early in the month when just the entire lagoon was lined with, I'm not a birder at all, so I don't know what they were, but brown duck-like beings. And it was just deafening quacks all across the place. But really, year-round to some degree or other, these guys live out here, and a lot of birds migrate through on this little island to the point where it's just known as Bird Island. There's a sign next to me that refers to it as the rookery, a little bit more dignified, but far more than rooks showing up there. So we really get to see live oaks in some of their natural splendor leaning out over the water there. They are generally not too much interfered with in their growth out here in the park, but these least of all. And right along the banks, you can see these roots sticking out. And these, that's a pipe. These are the roots of these guys, bald cypress. This is one of our other really noted regional trees. They are what the French Quarter and a lot of the historic city is built out of, and they used to be just everywhere. They leaf out right about now, so we're getting some of them turning green. There's some that are a lot lusher right now, but they're known as bald cypress because, unlike most cypresses, they are deciduous. They'll drop their needles and be all bald for the winter. There we go. There's one that is ready. So they are very well suited to be turned into buildings because the need here is for things to withstand floodwater. And as you can see, these are way better off in close contact with water than a lot of trees are. That is one of the advantages of working with native plants down here. So all in all, y'all, the World Cotton Centennial Expo is not a big success. Huge financial ruin, but it really spurred a lot of the development of this part of the city. It made people come up and see it, and it's hard to envision the kind of wonder that folks must have felt coming into contact with this for the first time. We're talking about a war-torn city where the war itself and the really difficult years of Reconstruction are kind of still bleeding memories. And then all of a sudden, here is this massive expo in what you knew as an ugly, abandoned, maybe dangerous space. And a lot of people who came here, paid the admission, would have seen electric lighting for the first time. Part of the miracle of this thing is that it stayed open after sunset. Steam trains. The electric lighting relied on also pretty cutting-edge motors, which were apparently incredibly loud. So there was a music hall, which was stunning for its scale. It was like 11,000 seats. But the motors that lit it were so loud that the only music you could really hear was if it was played with the massive electric organ that was also in the building. So not the broadest musical diet, although one of the things that the Expo is famous for is that it brought a lot of contributions from Mexico. Not all countries outside the U.S. really hustled to be a part of this thing, despite being invited to. But Mexico really seized the day, and among the things that they sent was a military band that created this huge vogue for sheet music of Mexican songs. And there's some theories in music world connecting that with the kind of shift towards what Jelly Roll Morton called the Latin tinge, the Spanish tinge, in the sound of jazz and ragtime, talking 1880s, so we're very, very shortly before those origins. So it's conceivable. I don't know if y'all can see the turtles out there sunning themselves. There's quite a lot of life in this lagoon. Even though it's man-made in a way that, if you've spent a lot of time in Louisiana, feels fairly persuasively natural. The ducks are shy. Or else they're bougie ducks with lawyers who have told them not to let their faces be seen on a YouTube video. Look in the comments section and see if you spot any cease and desist notices. So there was a lot of wonder if you were coming to the Expo. The electric lighting, all this cutting-edge technology, this sort of transformation of a part of town that was pretty ill-reputed in its day, and art. There was an art exhibit with local producers. You're not talking, it wasn't the Louvre by any means, although some of the buildings kind of looked like the Louvre. But it was one of the first public expos of art in New Orleans, so another first for plenty of people. So the arrival to this place, if you came at the right time, would have seemed like a huge deal. That said, a lot of people didn't come at the right time. The thing was so ambitious that it opened a couple weeks late. It basically opened in like mid-December of 1884, just because they promised to open in 1884, and they were running out of year in which to do that. And the people who showed up would have seen right here a pretty incredible entrance and gotten all that kind of metaphorical fireworks and literal fireworks too as they came in. But then they would have seen just like long stretches of mud, unfinished construction as they got further in, highlighting that they had bitten off a little more than they could chew. Yeah, you can still see from over here on Britannia Street. It's funny, mostly the side streets just come to a stop as they reach the park. But this one has this big triangle, which gives you a rough feel for the outlines of the big entrance. So there's another, by no means a chunk of iron ore, but a bit easier to get to. You don't have to worry about flying golf balls unless somebody has a really strong arm. I've been out here plenty and it hasn't happened to me yet. All along Exposition Boulevard, which, by the way, is actually these people's address. I passed earlier by a mail carrier walking along Exposition Boulevard. You can't drive. So they have street parking over nearby. They have back driveways sometimes that they can get to from little alleys. But all this beauty comes with its costs, no doubt. But it's a real interesting sort of architectural mishmash. A lot of this stuff is built in the 1890s and 1910s kind of period. And you get not only rapidly changing fashions in that time, but you get some things later torn down and replaced with newer stuff, so it's pretty eclectic. So even if you don't walk through the park itself, this walk along Exposition is pretty fun. if you get bored with the houses, or if you reach one of the spots where there aren't houses, you can just look right. Any old time. You'll notice maybe that the trees are pretty dense over here. That connects to the people who designed this. So mentioned the Olmsted firm of Central Park fame. And the big name known from that firm is Frederick Law Olmsted. If you know your historic landscape designers, then he's a big name in that world. He was getting unwell by the time this project was underway. But once the fair folded, there was a kind of rush to resolve its massive debts, and the city, or rather the operators of the fair, sold off almost all of the buildings. The buildings were wood construction. They were meant to be temporary in the first place, and in fact, there's quite a bit of that wood in homes around the neighborhood, since so much construction here happened in the wake of the Expo. So it takes this kind of crash of the Expo and then this massive sell-off of all the material from it to clear the space and create the idea that something else could happen. And then you get the Olmsted firm brought in to design the place. And rather than it being Frederick Law, it ends up being a guy who is his nephew and adopted son, who also works with the firm. And you could say that's kind of a double opportunity for nepotism there, if you were related to people in two ways at the same time. But in this case, the guy really threw himself at the job, and he brought some of the same aesthetic that you would see. He brings this choice of native material, which obviously I'm a fan of, and there were already a huge number of live oak trees out here. By the way, if you want to get your fitness on while you're out here, pretty good little fitness trail that surrounds little stations along this big circle path. So the principles that the guy brings, he has the lagoon idea. So again, this is not a natural body of water. Get it all lined here, y'all, with these are also bald cypresses, very happy ones. And you can see cypress knees. They run their roots out not only far and wide, but they send these little knees poking up and down. And if I'm remembering right, the kind of quote-unquote purpose of them, the reason why, is not at all well understood. But they are fun to look at, not fun to mow around. So another thing that Mr. Olmsted brings to the game is, you might have noticed the kind of linear character of the live oak trees along there. They're all planted kind of edging the park, and what that helps with is when you're here in the greenery, it kind of fades out the feeling of the city being nearby. The water too, the fact that there's sound coming from this a lot of the time, sort of mutes the noises of traffic coming from further away. All of these are things that early residents of the area, who were the initial impetus for a park that is now enjoyed by a much bigger cross-section of people. It's stuff that they would have wanted. A sense of isolation, kind of. A sense of being able to escape to nature without having to go terribly far. So here, y'all, we have the Newman Bandstand. One of these many large and small private additions to this public park, donations by various folks from the philanthropic class that lives up here. A lot of names that if you spent time exploring town, you'd get to recognizing. So over here you have the Newman bandstand, and the Newman surname is also on one of the better-known private schools in town. The gates up front of the park are named for the Stern family, big donors all around town. So not the most active event space, but every once in a while you'll find something going on here. It'd be more interesting in the opposite direction. Look at that. No way live oak trees grow that way on their own. This, it looks kind of like what we saw along the edge of the park. This same kind of linear planting of them, but this actually predates everything we've talked about so far. Goes all the way back to the Fouché plantation, and even possibly before Mr. Fouché's ownership of it. So if you've ever visited a plantation or seen one, they have this oak alley that lines the entrance. And usually the house is going to be up against the Mississippi or whatever body of water, and that is straight ahead as we're looking now. And then you're going to have the oak alley leading towards whatever the main street nearby is. So this is really the main, or maybe even apart from the outline, the sole vestige of the place's plantation era. Of course, we've added stuff. Have these lampposts all along it, a little bit of a Narnia vibe. We've also got a glimpse from here of our World War I memorial, just a flagpole with a foundation that has the names of New Orleanians who were part of that war. And southern live oaks, if you know them from their plantation setting, are very much infused with this connotation of kind of looking a bit like escorts towards the mansion. They get inducted into plantation's atmosphere, but of course they predate all that. Some of the trees individually predate all of that. You've got live oak trees living in New Orleans as old as 800 years and much older some other places. And you can see younger but still remarkable, the brown stuff up there all along the branches. That's an air plant called resurrection fern that grows harmlessly on the branches of live oak trees. And it appears to die when it dries out a bit. It hasn't rained here for a few days. And then once it gets wet, it will apparently spring back to life. It looks like it's coming back to life. It's the same old foliage. It just rehydrates and looks completely different. Air plants wise, we've also got our Spanish moss famously hanging from these. Something it's a little actually hard to find in the city proper, tucked in the gray beardy looking stuff that's hanging from a lot of these. It doesn't care for growing right next to where cars drive. Frequent exposure to car exhaust is not good for it. So parks like this one in City Park are where it happens. Y'all can see the parking over here. This is how folks get into the golf club. There's also a little golf club cafe over there. I'm going to take you out of the park on this side in a moment. So for orientation, we have gotten to what is today the far side of what most of us would call Audubon Park. It's not the edge of Audubon's property. More on that in a second. But you can see the Oak Alley keeps going with an interruption. When the World's Fair happened, when there was a plantation here, Magazine Street, the street just in front of me, did not exist. It did exist, rather, but it didn't come through right here. It ended at the edge of the plantation over that way. But nowadays, Magazine, though this part of it is really quiet, is this very sought-after street with residential sections, but with a lot of portions that are shopping, dining, art galleries, antique stores. And besides St. Charles, it's the other main thing people want to see in the uptown area. So if you're exploring around here, what I suggest is you can, like I mentioned earlier, get off the streetcar over there on St. Charles, wind your way through the park, and find your way to Magazine Street, where there is a bus that operates on the same system as the streetcar, the same New Orleans Regional Transit Authority, NORTA, if you want to look for the app where you can buy tickets. It's a $3 day pass to have unlimited 24-hour rides. So you can use the streetcar for the scenery on the way up, walk through the park, and use the bus along Magazine, which picks up from just a little ahead. It's not running this portion right now because of the construction that's underway, which I promise will be complete the day before you plan on visiting New Orleans, assuming you're watching this as a prospective visitor. Hello to my fellow New Orleans residents. Thanks for watching. So you can catch this bus over here, and you can treat it as a hop-on, hop-off bus, and it can take you all the way back to the French Quarter. Not only that, it also has a home stretch along the area that we would call the Lower Garden District. St. Charles is not the most appealing space visually through there, but the bus runs along a gorgeous route through that portion. So highly recommend that kind of artificial loop with a beautiful walk in the middle. $3 to be able to string all that together. Not too bad. So leaving Audubon Park per se right now, but there is more up ahead that we'll round up with. So over this way, you can see off in the distance, can't make out the oak alley from here, but that's what all that is. And one of those various private donation monuments is in that spot straight out there ahead. I'm gonna take you over there for a quick view. All right, y'all, here we are at the other end of the oak alley. And while once it would have framed the way into the Fouché Plantation house, nowadays got this lovely little wading pool. A gift, as the monument says, to the little children of New Orleans by a woman named Sarah Lavinia Hyams from back in the day when people had middle names like Lavinia. It's a lovely little spot, and while in a lot of ways the extension of Magazine Street definitely makes sense from a perspective of navigating the city and the turning of most of what's behind it into the Audubon Zoo, something that has been gradually underway for almost as long as the park has existed. It was a space that a lot of locals would have associated with animals from the Expo. The Expo brought a fair share of kind of zoo-like features, but it was expected that there was going to be something animal-like out here in this natural space, and so a zoo gradually developed. So because the zoo takes up so much of this space between Magazine Street and the river, I rarely ever see people in this kind of margin of the park that lies between Magazine and the zoo, which, given the prettiness of this monument, is kind of a shame. The framing right here, too, the end of the oak alley, and I don't know if this is the original ending, if the house would have been right here or further along towards the river. I'm inclined to think the latter, but regardless, back in the Expo days, this spot was a place called Horticulture Hall. It was the city of New Orleans' contribution to the Expo, and it was what it sounds like. It was a spot to show off plant life. It was a massive glass greenhouse, and it stayed standing after the Expo was over. It was one of the vestiges for quite some time. It lasted until first 1908, a tornado hit and did some damage to it, and then 1915, a hurricane finished it off back before we named hurricanes. So a sad loss. If there was one thing that I could change about the kind of zigzag trajectory of this place, I would love to bring Horticulture Hall back as maybe it would be an attraction within the Audubon Zoo if it still existed. So, I mean, a little bit more to see along the edge of the park over there, but by way of a summary of the place's history, basically you go from a failed plantation to an abandoned plantation to a shady deal to a completely failed expo
to multiple natural disasters, notwithstanding other things that I haven't mentioned. The guy in charge of the park commission got assassinated while the whole thing was underway. The place has been through some incredible, I was going to say ups and downs, but really just downs. It's incredible how much kind of suffering and arduousness it took to make this place what it is today, this place that feels like nothing but peace and respite. And it just highlights the virtues of forgetting that this place is beloved by New Orleanians today, even though it represented so much kind of difficulty and pain and disappointment for a lot of the forebears. And here I am bringing up all that stuff again. So, reasons to grow up not necessarily knowing history and to get fresh first impressions, but then to learn it later on and to internalize how remarkably and how not necessarily evidently some of these things have changed. Passing by, I'm going to take y'all on a bike for this part, just for a home stretch. So passing by a stables right now. Sometimes you'll see horses, folks usually on said horses, in Audubon Park. And if you ever see a parade in New Orleans, you'll almost certainly see horses in them. And after the parades, not uncommon to see those horses walking through the small streets of uptown, perhaps holding up cars, but we expect that during parade season, to find their way back to the stables here where they live. So we can see a couple of parade veterans poking their faces through there. Just beyond it, there are more reasons to keep going if you don't decide to do the Magazine Street thing, or if you decide to linger for a little bit before you take Magazine. Some nice quirky houses along this stretch, more architectural oddities, and then one of the newest donations out here, that area right up ahead on the other side of this gate, is a labyrinth, a kind of meditation space to just walk through. It's got a twisty-turny path that is meant to give you some feeling that even if things are in a pretty winding way, it's all going somewhere. Something that people certainly, after Katrina when that was installed, but at plenty of other places in this space's history, message that they could have used. So if you could use it, there's a place to get it. And the last of the climbable oaks, the Tree of Life. This is a neighborhood favorite, really a citywide favorite. Spot for weddings, all kinds of things. And where I am ending this video is actually where we started another video. You can continue going in this direction. I'm going the wrong way on a one-way, so maybe don't emulate me right now, especially if you're in a car. But straight up ahead of us is Audubon Riverview Park / The Fly. Mr. Olmsted, who landscaped all of this, thought that the fact that there was a massive view of the Mississippi was the best thing and wanted to incorporate it into the park's plan. But then the city, the land was leased to the Army Corps of Engineers, and they were like, no, we need a train through there. So it got used for the construction of train tracks for quite a while. And then the city used it as a dump, which it built the land out, so you actually have more space there than you would have if it had been developed sooner. But basically, this late 19th century plan by the Olmsted firm didn't come to fruition until late in the 1960s. Finally, that area opened as a park. So we previously did a video, Roby and James and I together, that started out here and then went over to the Fly as the beginning of a bike trip that went miles and miles up the Mississippi. So if this plantation talk is interesting to you, if you'd like to see more live oak trees and get more of the kind of transition of Louisiana from, kind of colonial to agrarian to industrial, that's the stuff we talk about on that tour. So drop a link to that. It's the first of our road trip series that we did in 2021, going gradually up the Mississippi through various sites. So check that out, and we've got our videos about Magazine Street and about different parts of St. Charles Avenue to get you more of a feel for those areas if you're going to make this part of a longer chain of exploration. I thank you for your time, the trees and the air plants. Thank you for your time. I'm sure whether they know it or not, the residents of Exposition Boulevard / Boulevard Street. Thank you for your time. And the giraffes over across that fence, also thank you for your time. Drop us a note. Let us know what you think. Let us know what else you'd like to see. Talk to you soon.